encyclical on climate change and global inequality, a powerful support for local social justice movements. So we have two terrific speakers tonight. John is a member of the Greens, the New South Wales Upper House. He was elected in March 2007. He's been a vocal critic of electricity industry privatisation and a strong advocate for renewable energy, which the Pope is too. Before entering Parliament, John taught and researched electrical engineering at the University of New South Wales, where he specialised in sustainable energy and greenhouse issues. John has a PhD from the University of California at Berkeley and over 20 years of research and teaching experience. Thank you, John.
I should begin with some disclaimers about my validity of being here today. And the first of those is that I was not born into a family from a Christian background. I do that before Alice actually does it for me. So I am singularly unqualified. I was born singularly unqualified to comment on what a Pope would have to say. The matter was compounded by being educated by Presbyterians. And nowadays, that word strikes fear into the hearts of most rational people, in those days even more so. And particularly the particular brand of Presbyterian that I was educated by, who contained amongst their numbers some very substantial bigots who had not overcome some slight that occurred to them 500 years earlier at the time of the Reformation, and still felt there was something not only wrong with Catholicism, but more fundamentally something wrong with Catholics. In reaction to that, I became very pro-Catholic for a period of my life. Well, I should say I was pro-Catholic as in pro-Catholics. I was never particularly attracted to the doctrine. I should also say, in all fairness, that I am an atheist, and a proud atheist. I'm not an atheist in the sense that I don't believe in God. I'm not an atheist in the sense that I believe that there is no God. Both of those statements are true. I'm an atheist in the sense of Dawkins. That is to say, I accept the evidence that leads one to the conclusion that there is no God. So that leaves me in a slightly messy position to comment on a document that I must say is fundamentally theological. It is in its own way a statement of a transition of belief of a religious body that is struggling to cope with the scientific realities, the physical realities of the 21st century. And in that sense, it's a remarkable document, but am not qualified to, nor do I have the capacity to seriously understand that transformation, and I thank Paul for walking us through that in a very erudite way. There's no way I could have done that. I should give you the fourth and final disclaimer. I am an engineer. And engineers look at the world, they look at objects around them and they say, what can we do with that to make life better? And so when I read Laudato Si, and I thank Wind and Politics in the Pub for forcing me to do so, and not just to do what I had done previous to that, which was read reports of it in the media and do the usual thing one does and act like you've read it. When I actually read it, I realised that there were things that we could do, useful things that we could do with that, powerful things we could do with it, and powerful things that need to be done very quickly to address the crises, not just of the environment, but the crisis, the twinned and related crisis, the interrelated crisis, the inseparable crisis of inequality and distribution of wealth on the surface of our planet. I'm going to annoy Win a little bit by, at some stage, talking about what I think are three blemishes of a relatively minor nature, or blemishes that one can overlook, and two blemishes which I think are substantial failings, which to me leave the document fundamentally flawed as an intellectual document. But nonetheless, I will conclude by saying this is a most significant document that will have far-reaching impacts for the good across our planet. The other disclaimer I want to say is that I've come to the conclusion that you can't really trust what I'm going to say about this document. So what I'm going to say is read it yourself. and I say that in all due respect to my own capacities, but I bring to the table too many prejudices and too much of a sense of utter urgency about certain matters particularly to do with women, and particularly with women in the third world, and particularly to do with women who are living in dire poverty in the third world, to actually warmly welcome this document. But that's not a comment on Francis, it's probably more a comment, as Paul pointed out, on the politics Francis finds himself in. One of the features of the document is he keeps saying, as the bishops of Bolivia said, as the bishops of Argentina said, as the bishops of the Philippines said, he's clearly trying to draw together an organisation with disparate views, an organisation riven by factions, an organisation where there is intense personal dislike, and I would have no idea what that felt like, being in a political party. But measuring it against that, I think you can say there are some positive issues in there. But I do want to say you should read it yourself. And you'll come away, like me, regardless of what you think of the blemishes, you'll come away thinking, he's a nice guy. He's a warm guy. He's a guy that when you should get here to politics in the pub and go and have dinner after with him and have a bit of a fight with him, a bit of an argument. He looks like a guy. He's engaging. The document is, I accept it's written by many people. It's badly edited enough to be deliberately badly edited in order to make you want to read it and like the guy. There is a quirky personality that comes through that is engaging and pleasant. So the negative things I say about him. The second thing you could do with it, having read it, is send a copy to Tony Abbott.
Oh, yes.
Tony says he's a Catholic, and he said it's been a lot of time under the influence of two particular Catholics, Catholic leaders, both of whom I find problematic. One was Pell, and the other was B.A. Santa Maria. I think most of this audience is old enough to know who B.A. Santa Maria is, and I'll come back to Mr. Santa Maria later on. But from a perspective, from the engineer's perspective rather than the theologian's perspective, this is very important. It's an establishment figure who is articulating a deep ecological message. It's an establishment figure who is talking about the urgency of response to the largest single environmental challenge of not just the 21st century, but indeed of human existence, and that is, of course, reducing our climate changing emissions and stabilising the climate of the planet. And he, like Barack Obama, has recognised there's no time to muck about. You've all heard it, I'm going to say it again, we are the first generation to feel the effects of climate change, and we are the last generation to be able to do something about it. Unfortunately, those words are true, and unfortunately they impose on us a certain moral filter when we deal with things. And I find that is why, in the end, I overlook the blemishes in Laudato Si to say it is a worthwhile document. Most critically, and most radically, and from my perspective, most functionally important, he identifies the intertwined nature of social justice and the environment. Those of you who have known me in the Greens will know that I've spent the last 20 years in the Greens battling for a deeper understanding that there are not two separate issues. There is no issue with social justice that exists without solving the environmental challenges. There is no way you can solve the environmental challenges without solving the inequality of distribution of wealth and power. And I am pleased to say that my words have not been wasted. Pope Francis has heard me and he's incorporated it into Laudato Si. Good on you, Frank. Identifying that particular and intimate connection, and that is a two-way connection. Environment cannot be solved without solving social justice. Social justice cannot be solved without addressing environmental challenges. That is the core and the framework in which this document is written, and that is a huge step forward. If we can get our body of politics, particularly those who work in matters of global affairs, to recognise that single fact, then we will go a long way towards addressing the challenges. He also identified, I have more to say on this later on, he identifies markets, greed and consumerism as chief causes of the crisis in both social justice and the environment. And it's coming from the undisputed and irrefutable and infallible head of 1.4 billion adherents around the world. That has to be something. And many of those adherents are in places of important power. And his reach and his power goes beyond those 1.4 billion. And in the context of a planet in crisis, in the context of a planet where there is an utter urgency, a moral imperative to respond to climate change, where we have growing inequality, where we have half of the world's population living on less than $2.50 a day, 3 billion people in poverty, where we have 800 million people who are drinking water as we speak, which is probably going to kill them and their children. We are at a point where we can go no longer without addressing these. Can I also say that the perception of this document is more important than the reality of the document? The way it has been perceived in the media, whatever it says in there, there will be a few of us who will read it and critique it, but the perception is the critical thing, and the perception is driving the world in a good direction, and to that I strongly support it. I also want to say that this document has to be good because, bear with me a second while I sort out my paper. This document has to be good because the Fox News' Greg Gutfield called the Pope a Marxist, and he says it could be on Occupy Wall Street. He says all Pope Francis, needed is dreadlocks and a dog with a bandana, and he could be on Occupy Wall Street. It has to be good because Andrew Neapolitano, if you want to have some fun, go onto YouTube and Google Andrew Neapolitano, fascinating guy. He used the bully pulpit of the papacy to shame people in distributing wealth in such a manner as to help the poor. And one of the ways, which I thought was a great idea, and one of the ways he's trying to do that is by encouraging governments to get involved in restricting behaviour that allegedly causes something allegedly called global warming. The list goes on. Stephen Milroy, who calls it adolescent insipid and the Pope is a people hater. Hard to reach that conclusion if you read it, but he says, compared to the Pope's actions, he compares the Pope's actions to those of the KGB, and the list goes on. But even our good old mate, Archbishop Pell, said that the Church had no particular expertise in science. He's criticising this. He has no particular expertise in science. Funny about that, because in 2011, in October 2011, in response to a bill that we introduced in the upper house of the New South Wales Parliament to stop there being new coal-fired power stations built and new coal mines, he said that that global warming had already stopped and that CO2 was, quote, not a pollutant but part of the stuff of life, and the carbon dioxide atmosphere was doubled, plants would love it. And so on. I won't bore you with that. Oh yes. And he said, as a famous quote goes, every scientific truth goes through three states. First, people say it conflicts with the Bible. Next, they say it's been discovered before. And lastly, they say they've always believed it. That's actually not Pell. That's Professor Turney criticising Pell. What I'm saying is that there has been a backlash. Everybody who's backlashed against it are people that we like. But I do want to say, I do want to put in my colleague and friend and to some extent mentor, Dr. Marine Faruqi in the upper house said, put in a good word for the Mozzies, will you please, being the Muslims. And she was quite right. It turns out that the Islamic leaders have, well, I don't know whether they've followed suit, but on the 18th of August, there's been an Islamic leadership conference which has called for the phasing out of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and 100% renewable energy strategy. Again, they stole that from the Greens, but good on the Muslims for doing that. Hakima Al-Haiti, who's the Morocco's environment minister, said it's a motive call for a spiritual fight against climate change that will be very important for Muslim. It speaks to the issues of fairness, accountability, differentiation, adaptation and Paris Agreement. I think the right way to make this sort of call is through the Quran. So, the good guys are with us, the bad guys are against us. This is a summary statement. There's much to admire in this document when you go through it. I'm now going to do a shopping list. I used to believe you should never do shopping lists in speeches. I'm going to do a quick one. Here are some good things in it. It's a comprehensive state analysis of the state of the environment. It comprehensively dismisses climate denialism in a kind of flick off that's very nice. It does talk about biodiversity and water. It talks about the marine environment. It talks about the challenges created by the privatisation of water. It talks about global inequality and power, political power and oppression. It talks about the commons and the importance of protecting the commons. It talks about reductionism and the dangers of narrow focus on specific problems without seeing the world as an entirety. It criticises anthropocentrism. It talks about lifestyles and markets and the ecology of daily life. It talks about the importance of individual lifestyle state change as well as changes to market. It talks about fossil fuels. It even talks about GMOs, genetically modified organisms. It talks about the environmental consequences of markets. It has a good paragraph on environmental impact statements. Critically, it talks about Indigenous people and the special role that the culture of Indigenous people plays in our society. In short, it's great. It really would be like Francis has been to every politics in the pub for the last 20 years and taken detailed notes and put it into an encyclical. So politics in the pub, well done, you're driving change in the Catholic Church without knowing it. So what's not to like? What's not to like in this? Well, I think the first issue, which I'm not sure I like this or not, it's not directive. I went back and had a look at the papal encyclical from 1968 called Humanae Vitae, which is the one which says it's a sin to pop a condom on your willy if you're going to have sex. I'm paraphrasing what Paul VI said. But pretty close to that, actually. When you read the language, it's pretty graphic. That was full of thou shalts and thou shalt nots. There are very few thou shalts and thou shalt nots in this document. And one wonders whether some adherents of the Catholic Church will say, well, we don't have to follow this because it doesn't tell us what we've got to do. And maybe it would have been nice if he'd had a little section in their sealed section for Tony Abbott. Tony, read this. Tony was in the sealed section, would have gone off and his ears would have flapped, he would have read it, and then he would have said, just get your hands off it, Tony, and do the right thing. A more substantial blemish is in my mind, no, I'll leave that out. It's not really a blemish at all. A more serious blemish in my mind is its treatment of abortion. And I'm sorry, I'm probably going to offend people at this point, but I don't just disagree with the Catholic Church's teaching on abortion and on reproductive health. I don't just disagree with it. I find it offensive, and I reckon a bunch of blokes should leave it alone and leave women's reproduction up to the individual woman. And I am deeply concerned that the Pope, and I understand from what Paul says, the politics of why the Pope did this. I understand why he did it, but he has a fairly substantial dig at, since everything is quote from him, everything is interrelated, concern for the protection of nature is also incompatible with the justification of abortion. How can we genuinely teach the importance of concern for other vulnerable beings, however troublesome or inconvenient they may be, if we fail to protect a human embryo even when its presence is uncomfortable and creates difficulties? I say to Pope Francis, have the life I've had. See what happens when abortion is illegal. See what happens to women from working class backgrounds who can't get access to an abortion but need to terminate a pregnancy. Have a good look at it. He also does that thing which, uncharacteristically for him, he's kind of borrowed from the right. I mean, he has an attack on relativism, the bête noire of the moral absolutists. Relativism to me is the idea that I have to respect your view, you have to respect my view. Different people come to truths in their life from different positions. But like many of the religious, he says he neatly equates relativism with hedonism and irresponsibility. And I just don't accept that. I think there are relativist points of view, morally relativist points of view, where you say your morals are your morals, mine are mine, but you still have good quality ethics. I think he fails to recognise, underneath this there is a failure to recognise that ethics don't have to come from religion. They don't have to come from a creator or a supernatural belief. There are many of us who are highly ethical and believe in ethical societies who have comprehensively rejected religion and monotheism, and who indeed believe that ethics were an evolutionary phenomenon, that ethics were the things that we evolved to have because they made society work. And I find that the equation of relativism with poor behaviour dangerous. I'm also troubled, I must say, this is not just the engineer in me, about the anti-technology stand that the Pope takes. And he fails to make a distinction. He interchangeably uses technology and technocrats. And I think there's a difference. And what he doesn't do is analyse technology. Uncharacteristically for the document, his analysis of technology is weak. He does not analyse it in a social or political or economic context. He kind of gets stuck into it. I've got to say, that's the language of a naive hippie. We have 7.2 billion people on this planet. We have to feed them. We have to have people communicating with each other. And we have to do so in a way that minimises the damage to the planet. Without technology, without yet even more technology, we will not be able to do that. And secondly, I've got to tell you, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for technological advances. Many of us would have died in pain, younger. Many of us would have had much diminished lives. I reject the rejection of technology. I accept the arguments that the slavish adherence to technology for technology's sake can devalue life, but I do not believe that is a fault of technology. I believe it's a fault of the economic and political systems we live in, which leave us driven into, and Paul quotes the example of people who are obsessive about taking photos. I'm a bit of an obsessive photographer myself. But I blame that not on the iPhone that has a great camera in it. I blame it on a society that has failed to engage us morally and spiritually and to stimulate us to the point where we don't engage in those sorts of issues. But I must say there are two substantial blemishes from which I think actually the document is somewhat unrecoverable if you read it carefully. But don't worry, Wynne, I'm going to come back and say something nice at the end.
Very balanced.
I'll be very balanced at the end. And that is, the first and most substantial one is that it fails to address, as I said before, poverty and women. 1.5 billion women live on this planet on less than $2.50 a day. Why women? Why am I worried specifically about women? For two reasons. Firstly, everybody living in poverty deserves a better life. And everybody living in poverty deserves to be raised to a global middle class standard of at least $6,500 a day, access to electricity, clean water, clean food, housing, shelter and education. Sorry?
$6,000 a day.
$6,500 a year. So I was just channeling Rupert Murdoch, sorry. Go away, Rupert. It's because he got onto Twitter, he's got into my head. But there are specific challenges for women living in poverty that cannot be overlooked and were overlooked in this document. The issues of violence within relationships, the issues of disempowerment within community and within family and within relationship, the issue of disease, particularly the diseases of childbirth and the diseases of early childhood rearing, and the issues of looking after children, which unfairly falls onto women, particularly in third world countries. These are substantial challenges. These are core social justice challenges that need to be specifically isolated and addressed, and in an otherwise comprehensive document, the Pope failed to do so. But there is another reason for doing so, which Paul alluded to, in which I firmly believe, and which the evidence shows, which is the empowerment of women is an integral component of the development of a sustainable planet. You would empower women even if it weren't that case, but it is that case, and that's an even more powerful reason for doing it. If every woman on this planet were literate, if every woman on this planet had access to electricity, if every woman on this planet had access to either the internet or to television or to radio, we would live in a very, very different planet. For the first instance, infant mortality would fall dramatically in third world countries and in disadvantaged communities. You would say, well, isn't that going to lead to a population boom? It has, ironically and paradoxically, the opposite effect. If you lower infant mortality, you reduce family sizes, you reduce population growth rate. Brazil. Brazil is a classic case. Brazil, an increase in female literacy, a reduction in infant mortality, and soap operas totally destroyed the population growth rate in Catholic Brazil. Soap operas are significant, and that's why I say access to media, because they showed women an alternative lifestyle. If you've ever watched a Brazilian soap opera called Rosa de Lejos, great piece of melodrama all the way through, but it modelled lifestyles for women who had access to resources. Rosa herself had one child from recollection, and the women in the barrios saw this and they changed their lifestyles instantly, and it had a revolutionary effect. But it was also because they were literate, and it was also because they had access to tell. We have to do these things. The Pope misses out on doing that. Instead, he has what Paul referred to, and I have also read, is a desalutary dismissal of reproductive health, as only a bloke in a bloke's institution could do, and is a great tragedy. My second criticism is this. This is a very strong repudiation of capitalism and of market neoliberalism, and one which I find myself strongly attracted to. But it is a very weak set of alternatives, and it does not, how long have I got, Virginia?
5 more minutes.
Minus 5 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, I'll talk backwards. It does not, I think, close the circle on where we should go. And I'll just read you. I'll read you a paragraph, if I may, that summarises his critique of market neoliberalism. While the earnings of a minority are growing exponentially, so too is the gap separating the majority from the prosperity enjoyed by those happy few. This imbalance is a result of ideologies which defend the absolute autonomy of the marketplace and financial speculation. He stole that bit from our federal policy, by the way. Consequently, they reject the right of states, charged with vigilance for the common good, to exercise any form of control. A new tyranny is thus born, invisible and often virtual, which unilaterally and relentlessly imposes its own laws and rules. Debt and the accumulation of interest also makes it difficult for countries to realise the potential of their own economies and keep citizens from enjoying their real purchasing power. A succinct criticism on a global scale of what markets are doing to the distribution of wealth between poor and wealthy nations. But the problem is, what does he say to do about it? And I'm perhaps being a little bit unfair, but let me quote, I think, the best passage I found, ethics, of what he says we should do. Ethics, a non-ideological ethics, would make it possible to bring about balance and a more humane social order. With this in mind, I encourage financial experts and political leaders to ponder the words of one of the sages of antiquity, quote, "Not to share one's wealth with the poor is to steal from them and to take away from their livelihood. It is our own goods which we hold, but theirs. A financial reform," so he then goes to say, "a financial reform open to such ethical considerations would require a vigorous change of approach on part of political leaders. I urge them to face this challenge with determination and eye to the future, while not ignoring, of course, the specifics of each case. Money must serve, not rule." Nice words, but weak words. Weak words which fail to get to the heart of what we need to do here. Until and unless the capacity to control the flow of money is democratised and resides with people, not corporations, until and unless we get to a stage where once again states can say, we will do these things collectively for the common good, and not just our own common good, but the common good of the entire planet. Until and unless we get to the state where communities can empower themselves without the threat of multinational corporations coming in and taking away their livelihood and their capacity to determine their own futures in the name of prosperity for the few, unless we get to those states, any amount of nice words will be meaningless. I fear that at the final hurdle, the Pope was not able to get there. He was not able to push through in a very wealthy institution, he was not able to push through the final hurdle, which is to say the relationship between capital and labour is broken and needs to be rewritten in a new form.
Okay.
And that failure is something which I think is writ large in the way this document is read by those who read it. But I finish more or less as I began. That doesn't matter as much as the fact that he has identified the problem, and he, as a leader of 1.2 billion people, as an influential establishment figure, he has said there is a problem. He has said that problem is intertwined between environment and social justice. It is up to the rest of us how we use this document, how we deploy it in our campaigns. And the question we're asked is, can we do so? And my answer to that is, my oath, we can. We should and we will. Thank you so much for listening.